Hello, class. How's everybody doing? Happy, snowy, whatever, spring term. Um, Here we are, lecture numero uno. As I said in my initial email to everyone, I'm going to be keeping the lectures to a minimum. I'll probably try and give you a lecture material every other week, uh, just to kind of follow up with the readings and make sure that we're all looking at these things and making sense of them. A few of you have brought up questions of how the discussion boards are going to work and whatnot, and so at the end of today, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Um, so that's just a little teaser. So, um, and yeah. So you all read through the email. I've talked to a few of you in the hallways. I've talked to the other few of you by email. And I know that you understand that we are going to be talking this term about value um, and the kind of myriad of ways that value can be dealt with. Now, if any of you had any conversations with the students who are in their second year about this class, it's different. Yours requires a research paper, and so that's what a lot of your time is going towards. I had them do some more specific value related projects, so that's just kind of a different thing. They had a different syllabus. Um, so for us, we're going to be talking about value as, excuse me, as a system. And what I want to get right off the bat is the fact that value is a system. The way that we deal with the word value is always by affixing something to an object. So think back to semiotics, right? Think back to the sign being a signifier and a signified, or a thing with a meaning. Well, value is the verb part of semiotics, because value is the active labeling or branding of a certain idea as X. It's valuable for religious reasons. It's valuable for monetary exchange. It's valuable for personal keepsake. There's lots of different ways that people use the word value when they talk about works of art and cultural production more broadly, and everything in the world realistically. And we're going to be starting off by looking at the art market and then kind of zooming out a little bit. And so for today, we're going to be kind of looking, we're going to be starting big and zooming in. And so I want to start off with this quote from the always pronounce their name, the coroner. I always want to call them the coroners. They're probably the coroner, whatever. Value. This one. Is it value? It's from this textbook, Critical Terms for Art History, which you can't really see the cover of in this thing because I have too big of a. I'm so bad at YouTube, video production in general. This is a really handy book. It has a lot of very useful terms that artists and art historians use in conversation with one another. And in their conversation about value, the coroners deal with. I'm just going to call them the coroners. The coroners deal with establishing the way that we will systematize looking at value. And I use this text as really the backbone for structuring this course, because there's lots of different ways that the word value can be ascribed, and there's lots of different definitions that can be the backbone of that word. Backbone twice in a sentence. Wrong way to do it. Anyway, so what they say on first page is, for what taste demonstrated most clearly was that the source of value lay not in the judged object, but in the judging subject. Now, I bring up this quote because as we look at various forms of value, one of the things that will always be brought up is who is doing the judging. The way that we deal with contemporary value, it's a subjective verb. It is a perspective. I value something, that doesn't mean that you are going to value it. If the art market puts a monetary value on something, that doesn't mean that a museum or a viewer to that museum is going to think any higher of it. And so there's always the subjective at play as we deal with a value. And so really this is going to be a conversation about what kind of value you are interested in. Now, to keep things kind of rolling and to keep things kind of light, because that's established. Those of you who've read through the corner text, I can't pronounce the name, the corner text, you know what I'm understanding. And for those of you who don't, get on it. That was assigned last week. So, in thinking about kind of how the subjective nature of value, I'm talking to a class full of artists, and so artists have a different, or ostensibly could have one base for all kind of collective subjectivity. That an artist will ascribe value in a specific way to a work of art that is similar to other artists, regardless of socioeconomics, regardless of access points or privilege. An artist, as the bearer of that job title, is going to bring a certain kind of value system to the situation. They're going to bring it up. Now, talking about the artist is why I decided to give you that very, very contemporary text by yet another name that I'm going to totally botch. So thankfully there aren't that many Polish language speakers in this class, but Dereskowicz is my guess. William Dereskowicz. And he talks about entrepreneurship. And he talks kind of problematically about the developing nature of the artist. And so in order to give us a little bit of a historical background, I wanted to walk you through some of the developments that Dereskowicz deals with regard to the profession of the artist. And also, I'm going to be talking about how that change in profession changed the value system, that subjective value system that those artists, that enclave of makers, are going to be using. So we start off with the artist as a maker. Now, this generally means that it's a craftsman or a craftsperson inside of a workshop. There is kind of one painter per town. I'm talking, not even one painter per town, because I'm talking like pre-Renaissance, so the medieval period back. Artists serve a very specific role within these societies, let me say this another way. You're going to see this development of our idea of an artist, and it goes back to people that worked inside of these workshops as craftspeople. They were principally there to make things for clients. A client would ask for something, and the maker would then do it. I need a sign painted. I'm going to do that. Certain painters in this pre-Renaissance period were kind of designated, their workshop was within the court. And those people are making portraits of kings. Those people are making the kinds of paintings that we see all around, in institutional collections and whatnot. The artisan is going to be also making the other things in the cultural world. They're not necessarily going to be making bowls, but they are going to be making certain objects. So that's the first phase, and Dereskowicz gets us there. With the Renaissance, the Renaissance, I actually say Renaissance because it reminds me how to spell it. There's an I after that A. Renaissance instead of Renaissance. Anyway, in the 1500s, a guy by the name of Giorgio Vasari published a book called The Lives of Artists. And in this text, Vasari did something that had never been done before. And he took all of the different kind of fables that we had told before this period about rulers having this direct lineage to God, a pharaoh is a god on earth. The gods of the Holy Roman Empire were or the gods, geez, the kings of the Holy Roman Empire were chosen by the gods, by the Christian God at that point. Vasari begins to say that people like Cimabue, always hard to call that name forth. Cimabue being an early Renaissance painter, or Giotto being another early Renaissance painter, or Da Vinci, Michelangelo. These various people that history has been very kind to, Vasari links directly to holiness and also ascribes this notion of genius. They are different than just a craftsperson in a workshop. They have some sort of access point to ideas and perspectives that are grander than just the person who is potentially, I don't know, making something that is of a different use value. So it goes from artist as maker to artist as genius. With ideas coming, kind of bubbling up from the Enlightenment, we get to this notion that the artist is actually of the avant-garde. The artist is the forward-thinking individual who, like Vasari's genius artist, has a perspective that's broader than anyone else. But unlike Vasari's artist genius, it's not rooted in holiness. The avant-garde is specifically a secular idea. It's an identity that is of the world, it's of the population. And so these artists as avant-garde saw themselves, again, as being kind of special, but also as being definitely rooted in the same community. They were helping the community out by being better than them. In the post-Salon period, or kind of the Impressionists, 1870 up to the First World War, the artist becomes a capitalist. Capital as an idea and as a structure and as a lingo begins to pick up speed, obviously after 1850s and such. But after the Paris Commune, when socialism was seen as a failed experiment within the French society, specifically in France, artists became much more relaxed about how they engaged with the market. Specifically avant-garde artists, artists who saw themselves as geniuses, these people who thought of themselves as having a privileged perspective. It begins to kind of be tempered back down into a little bit of being back at earth. You know, they are capitalists, they want to sell things, and they want to find new and exciting ways to present their work and their ideas to a consuming public. After the First World War, socialism as a cultural cry comes back. Artists begin to want very much to change the shape of society. They didn't see themselves as these disassociated intellectuals as they might have during the avant-garde period, or as holier than thou as they had in the genius period. But rather in this socialist perspective after the First World War, there is a very egalitarian notion. The artist still feels a sense of privilege and a sense of that's not necessarily linked with their privilege. They feel the sense of privilege because of the history that they are maintaining, right? They are continuing to write history the way that these great artists who are still regarded as genius or the avant-garde are doing. They're continuing that line, so there's still a little bit of cultural cred that's lingering around here. But they feel much more responsible for kind of presenting conversations that will help change the broader population that they're engaged within. So not to say that they were all like bleeding heart leftists, but that did come up as a position within the arts community in a different way after the First World War. And it's in such a drastic way that I think it becomes this kind of different epoch for artistic production. And then after the Second World War, the kind of social conversations fall away, and it goes to this idea of the artist as consumer. We get the rise of pop art, so artists are actually telling us what they are buying. But with the more kind of critical breeds of pop art that were coming specifically out of the United Kingdom and a little bit of LA, there was this kind of sense that that was a need for conversation. You know, the artists at post World War II acknowledged the fact that before them they were socially minded artists, and before them they were artists who were negotiating a market structure in the way that a capitalist would. And this artist as consumer kind of fuses those things. So keep in mind, they have retained, and that's why I've left this list running, they have retained the fact that they have a position that is different, possibly a little bit enlightened from other people. So there's this genius, this need for communicating with a broader audience but retaining that little bit of privilege is what the avant-garde is. Then you have the capitalist who's negotiating a market, socialist who's negotiating a market and also thinking of a broader population, and the consumer who begins to kind of identify a lot of other things that all of these moving parts, you know. And then we keep going here. After the fall of the wall, and really post 1989, when the Cold War ended. But yeah, when the Cold War ended, artists kind of began to internalize this full spread. And I know that I've talked to a lot of you about my use of the term cultural producer versus artist versus maker versus really whatever. This was the rise of that term. The idea of cultural production, which is a kind of understanding that you are going to be involved with the capitalist structure. So you are both a consumer of things, but also a seller of things. So you're both, you know, my little draw function. You're both a consumer and a capitalist. But you are, as a producer, you're very much a maker, and you're acknowledging you're making. And that's something that is kind of a given. You know, if you are the artist's genius, you're always going to be making something. If you are the capitalist artist, you're making something. That's the given. Even conceptual artists are making something. The making is a thought, and it usually has it's manifested in some sort of object. I mean, Solowit's conceptual works are pieces of paper that people buy and sell. So, you know, the genius thing is kind of questioned, still questioned. I don't really believe in genius. I think it's a weird historical farce, but it is definitely part of the disposition of a lot of people who consider themselves to be artists / cultural producers. And the idea of being a socialist or socially aware is a good way to say that, socially aware. Not just socialist with a capital S, but socialist is in like kind of a humanist. You care. So this whole idea of this kind of comes to, where are we? Stacks up. And all of these things are relevant to the way that a person who walks into an MFA program sees the potential landscape of the artist. Now, Deveskovich certainly deals with this, and I get it. He gives us that history. The one thing I find problematic about that is he assumes that this is something that's brand new. And actually, my thing is that with all of these things combined, I really should have taken out entrepreneurship from this slide, because with all of these things combined, you have a postmodern artist, right? So you have someone who is considering things in a myriad of ways. They're considering things as a maker, as a genius, even though it's a problematized word, as someone who's avant-garde, who's also kind of a problematized word. So, you know, if don't refer to yourself as avant-garde. It's weird, just like you wouldn't refer to yourself as a genius. But even though you wouldn't say those things necessarily about yourself, they're still part of the psyche of the artist and the way that the artist plays into the world that is around them, the world that they are making work for. So I really was happy that that Doveskovich text came out almost right before our class started, because I couldn't have summed up better these talking points had I not had something to kind of argue against. And I know I am arguing against him to a certain extent, but it's an interesting read, and I'm always happy to give you the like super current stuff because it's contemporary art. So, we move on from like what kind of player you can potentially be. I think all of you can be lumped in with this notion of a postmodern artist. This class, even though we're talking about value, we are also dealing with notions of postmodernity. Postmodernity as an idea is so big and so sloppy and so cumbersome and it's kind of a choose your own adventure discourse that I don't excuse me, I don't see a point in having a class that's called postmodernity. Instead, I want to talk about different value systems, because every postmodern artist values something differently. They value objects differently. They value institutions differently. They value audiences differently. And all of these artists negotiate the same or a similar structure when it comes to their marketplace. Now that said, I find it very problematic, the use of the word art world. And even though we are going to be talking very much about the Western art world, and I'll talk about Olav Veltis in just a second, I want to talk about this notion of provincialism. So, provinces, areas demarcated by a border. That's pretty much the definition of a province. It's like a place that's recognizable with boundaries and whatnot. To refer to someone as provincial generally means that you are inside of a city and they are outside of a city. So here you are and here they are. Modernists, people in the 1940s and 1950s who were defending ideas of modernism, they were the people who were in cities, and they claimed that they were here and everybody who was doing anything else was provincial. Even people in 1860 were saying that someone like Paul Cézanne was provincial because he was not in the city and his paintings were different than the people in the city. They use this as a slanderous term against Cézanne. He's not good enough to be in the city. And so you quite literally have this idea of somebody being an insider versus somebody being an outsider. This is problematic. And Terry Smith, this text from 1974 is, I want to like give it to every single person that I ever see at an art fair and just like smack them in the face with it for a lot of reasons. But one of the things that he talks about in that very first paragraph, provincialism appears primarily as an attitude of subservience to an externally imposed hierarchy of cultural values. That hierarchy is, we're in the city and we're better than you. We're out here and we're different than you. This idea of better than, again, subjective valuation systems. So provinces are perfect places to have a conversation about, or value is a perfect place to have a conversation about provinces. Because different provinces value different things. Now, as I was going through graduate school, we were having this conversation about the art world. And the term kept coming up, and at some point, someone raised their hand and said, Santa Fe is the third largest art market in the world, or in the country, excuse me. You have Los Angeles, which is number 2, and you have New York, which is number 1. New York and Los Angeles sell generally the same kinds of artists. They participate in the same art fairs, no matter if that art fair is in New York or in Los Angeles or in Dubai or in Miami or in Germany or in London. It doesn't matter. It's the same galleries, it's the same artists, it's the same presentation model. The press releases read almost exactly the same. In Santa Fe, the third largest market at that point, might be different now. Chicago's making a run for its money. You have this time, this moment, this ability to have this conversation about the flaw of the idea of the art market. The art market is so vast, it's so varied, and it has so much potential of encompassing the exchanges between anything from two Mecca students, two Mecca BFAs exchanging prints, which I have seen happen in the hallways. I'll give you this if you give me this, or paintings or sculptures or whatnot. That is an art market, because a market is a moment of exchange. An art market is a moment of exchange between cultural producers and cultural consumers. Done. And so the notion that the art world consists of this kind of insidery white cubiness and excludes anything like Santa Fe, to me, is bonkers. How can you talk about an art world without dealing with the full spread of it? I think that in 2007, which this is probably very different since the fallout of 2008, in 2007, art exchanges amounted to, I think, 3% of the global economy. That is not saying that the fine arts of things that are exchanged in white cubes at art fairs makes up 3% of the global market. It's that the entirety of the art market and the exchange of arts, meaning antiques as well, made up 3% of the global art market in 2007. Actually, those statistics were probably a few years old. Let's say 2005. 3%, that's a lot. And so to have communities, enclaves within this vast economy of art, to have certain people say that we are inside and you are outside is wildly problematic. One of the things that supposes is that we are informed and you are uninformed. Okay, cool, that's fine. Because if you are a follower of Islam and it's 800 AD and you wander into I just conflated Catholic and cathedral. Excuse me, I've had too much coffee these snow days. So if you are a Muslim person and you walk into a Catholic cathedral, Spain, 1800 AD, you're not going to have really much of an idea of what's going on, because you don't understand you don't understand the basics. You don't understand the shape of the building. You don't understand necessarily all of the different divination areas within a Catholic church. There's the baptismal font in a lot of Catholic churches. There's the confessional in a lot of Catholic churches. There's the altar in a lot of Catholic churches. Those are not necessarily to be found in your place of worship. And so you become the uninformed because you're new to this. You're a novice. You can't figure it out. You're brand new. Now, if you flip that and you have the Christian going to, say, Casablanca and going into a mosque there, they're going to have a similar experience, because they're going to see all of these different architectural features that are different, and they're not going to know how to negotiate them. They become the uninformed. And so when you're also dealing with art and exchange things, this notion of informed versus uninformed becomes kind of interesting. When we talk through the Olav Veltius's text, I understand this is a dense lecture, so roll with me. As we talk through Veltius's text, one of the things that he will negotiate is a distance between a traditional art market and a contemporary art market. And those two players, those two worlds, even though they exist in multiple cities, New York and Amsterdam are the two that he looks at most closely, that we will look at most closely, they function in exactly the same way. A traditional gallery in New York is almost identical to a traditional gallery in Amsterdam. A contemporary gallery in New York is almost identical to the contemporary gallery in Amsterdam. So one of the things that I want to establish right off the bat is that these notions create provinces unto themselves. There is a province of the white cube. It's kind of the slang term I'll use throughout the course of our conversation. The province of the white cube. What that means is you understand you're going to walk into a space that probably has concrete floors, that is devoid of any other auxiliary information, specifically visual or audio information, so that you can look at an object and consume it, and that's that. And it's like easy peasy. Now, if you go into a white cube gallery in Istanbul, or you go into a white cube gallery in Beijing, or one in Mexico City, or one in Vancouver, they're going to demand the same thing from their viewer, and they're going to give the viewer a similar experience. If you were to go into what Velthuis will call a traditional gallery, which in Portland we have quite a few of because they sell more kind of traditional objects, craft-based objects, things that can be bought and sold at a lower economic price point, accessing a wider network of people. Lots of ceramicists who make useful objects will sell in these markets. In our day and age, we have a lot of, or not our day and age, in our region, we have a lot of people who make landscape paintings. These would be resigned to traditional galleries because that's the tradition as it is entrenched in this community. If you go to Santa Fe, you're going to get a different kind of traditional gallery, but the aesthetic is going to be exactly the same. I've done a lot of traveling in my life. I've seen a lot of these places, some in English-speaking countries, some in not English-speaking countries. They generally take the same shape. It's kind of cute. It has the same smell. Often they're carpeted, and often there are glass cases with little traditional art objects inside for sale. The sale is much more present, but we'll get to that when we get through Velthuis's text. So what I wanted to talk about was this idea of the global versus the regional there. The white cube market actually creates one very kind of tiny province that has a bunch of different offshoots throughout the world. That global community it represents what the system of traditional galleries that we have in Portland is for our immediate locale. When people talk about the globalization of the art world, they're not actually talking about the way globalization works in any other market. What they're saying is, oh, Istanbul now has a white cube gallery. That's it. The globalization of the art world is just the white cube moving and setting up. And oftentimes that means that the art fair is not far behind it, or that the same stable of artists are going to be shown there. Or there's lots of different ways that this manifests, and we're going to be talking about them. If I'm drumming up a lot of questions, then good, because there's a lot. This is a big area of interest of mine. And one that I find very relevant for artists. So that's kind of the global thing. Regions, and they remain themselves. There's a regional aesthetic of landscape painting that is specific to this part of the country. There is a regional aesthetic of cultural production that's coming out of, say, Anchorage, Alaska, that's specific to that part of the country. But if there was a white cube gallery in Anchorage, which I'm pretty sure there is at least one, there's one, and there's a white cube, or a place like Space Gallery, because I know there's one of those that exists in Anchorage. They become part of a kind of a global network. They occupy the same province because, thanks to the internet, that province doesn't necessarily have to be tethered to a terrestrial place. These spaces can exchange ideas and identities and values or establish them without necessarily needing to be within the same perimeters or, as I said, the same landscape. And so this is a conversation that we're going to deal with also as we move through the class, but it's one that I wanted to set up now. That, you know, I'm going to be talking about the problems of a globalized art world in as much as I'm doing now. Like it's a flaw. And when we see the globalized art world by going down to New York City, you're going to see how all this stuff plays out. So we have global v regional, 2 provinces. I've been talking about Veltius. I hope that you all have been able to track down this book, Talking Prices by Olav Veltius. It has a tendency to be on the drier side as far as reads, but it's a spot-on take on the art market, and it's one that I find to be super level. A lot of people will approach the art market with some sort of subjective value judgment. Like, what's the one that has the Damien Hirst on the cover? It's like, why is that dead shark so much money? Or my feet hurt, contemporary art sucks, or something like that. Like, those are problematic because they're going to throw up too many roadblocks in your understanding of the actual structure of the art market. This book, by talking about traditional and contemporary galleries, gives you much more of an anthropology of the art market and of exchange, and that's what I find to be the most compelling. Because really, this course wants as its goals to give you a sense of different value systems and different economic structures, but not necessarily to tell you that, you know, this is how you're going to be famous in this world and this is how you're going to be famous in this world. I can't do that. That's impossible. What I can do is show you the structure of these things, introduce you to some various lines of inquiry that you can follow, and then kind of recommend that you make certain decisions. But it's really, I'm not trying to professionalize all of you so that you all have identical artistic careers. I want you to have an understanding of things so that you can then negotiate your own engagement. And then also acknowledge the personal objectives as a maker/researcher. As you see the myriad of ways that value is ascribed to things and that artists and other people do that projection, it's going to change the way that you want to make work. As you see the shape of the art market, the potentially global perspective, you know, if you hit the right gallery, your work can be shown on 6 continents. If you don't want that kind of life, or if you don't want that kind of art career, that's actually a life, you have to travel around quite a lot, then you can negotiate a different life for yourself. You can make work that really speaks to the community of contemporary producers that are around you that are not necessarily interested in, I don't know, being somebody who is within Barbara Gladstone's stable or something like that. There's pros and cons on both sides of things. So the hope is that as we walk through value and kind of quietly, almost without you being aware of it, we're going to stumble upon postmodernism in all of its various tales. You're going to notice that your work and the way that you negotiate exhibitions, personal exhibition platforms or directives, and further projects of your own is going to shift. And that's the hope of the class. And so 4 kind of summation questions are, you know, how would you describe your region? You know, if everything, as Terry Smith says, can be determined as provincial or can be labeled as provincial, what's your province? And in a kind of digital age where you don't have to be right around people who are making work like you or conversations like yours, that region actually becomes much more akin to what we talked about last term with positionality. Who are you and who are you speaking to? Are you traditional or contemporary? You know, that's a lot of times in specifically in art school conversations, traditional can be seen as a knock against your work or your practice. In this classroom and for conversations with me in general, I am totally fine with you declaring yourself a traditional in as much as you declaring yourself contemporary. I think there's strong suits to both of those things and there's weaknesses to both of those things. And the more you are honest with yourself, the more honest your work will be, and actually the more successful you will be at presenting your work to the kind of public you want to engage with. It's a big thing. How do you value? Do you buy things? Like, are you amassing a collection of works by artists that you enjoy? There are some artists that really want to do that. They see themselves as collecting is the way that they can ascribe value. For me, I like curating. The idea of buying works of art for me is, yeah, it'd be kind of fun, but I don't necessarily see an end point there. I'd rather have a show, have it be public, and have a conversation. That's how I value. This is a conversation for you to, this is the time for you to have that conversation with yourself. And then, are you an entrepreneur? In thinking about you being an entrepreneur, think about this role, this artist. Are you this? Having met all of you, having seen your work develop, I'm willing to say that yes, all of you are. And so I'm not going to be teaching you, as I said, how to sell your work, but I'm going to be teaching you how to get your work into conversations so that people can negotiate it with you. Like, I want all of you to be successful. I want all of you to make money in whatever role you want to do or perform. And it's just going to be a conversation between us. So let's do it. While I have you here really quickly, with regard to the message boards, I said I would go over that. So there is no weekly requirement for the message boards. I am keeping tabs of who I'm having conversations with and who I'm touching base with. That means an email exchange. I want all of you, I need all of you to be in conversation with me. If you're local, I want to do a studio visit. I want to do several studio visits over the course of the term. I'm busy, but I can squeeze in just running up to your studio and watching something or seeing something really quickly. So let's make that happen. If you have a question, email me, and let's unpack that in an email thread. It doesn't necessarily have to be for the whole class. And so, yeah, that's the message board thing. The research paper thing. Your research topics are due soon. Let's see, where's my course schedule? Now, some of you have asked me about, they're due soon, very soon, about various research topics, and some of you have suggested ideas that are close to the market or engaged with the market. Others, you don't really want to touch that. This does not have to be about value. It doesn't have to be about the market. But the art market is a huge conversation today, in as much as I don't want to teach you kind of how to be successful, like how to succeed in business kind of thing. I'm teaching you about the art market because it's something that every contemporary artist is negotiating now. And having an understanding of it before even moving into your second year of graduate school is going to be really helpful, I think. So, you don't have to write about value, but if you have questions about the art market, this is the time to, and this is potentially the research project that you could engage with it. Could be kind of cool for you. So, ask me questions about research topics. They all need to be in by the 30th at midnight. Fridays are the deadlines for this class. Midnight is fine for that deadline. If I don't respond to you until Monday, that means that I'm being good about keeping a life and work and having both of those two things be part of my existence on this planet. I recommend you finding at least 15 minutes for yourself. I'm not in grad school, so I can actually try and take a weekend. Cool. It's going to be a fun semester. Have fun with the readings. Let me know if you have questions, and welcome back.